By the closing months of 1945, something remarkable was happening across the ruins of Nazi Germany. The empire that Adolf Hitler had forged through terror and fanatical devotion was collapsing, and with it, the very idea of loyalty itself was dying. What the Nazis had promised would last 1,000 years was crumbling after barely 12. Soviet armies were pouring in from the east, British and American forces from the west, and everywhere you looked, the German military was falling apart. But here's what makes this story so fascinating. The SS, Hitler's personal guard, the men who had sworn an oath of absolute loyalty directly to the Führer himself, were about to show the world just how fragile that loyalty really was. These weren't just soldiers. They were supposed to be the purest believers, the truest fanatics, the men who would rather die than betray their cause. They wore their motto like armor. Loyalty is our honor. But as defeat became undeniable, as the dream of victory turned to ash, those sacred oaths began to crack and then shatter completely. From the frozen battlefields of Pomerania to the mountain hideouts of Austria, the evidence tells an incredible story. Diaries written in shaking hands, letters never sent home, testimonies given after the war, all of them paint the same picture. The SS wasn't destroyed just by Allied bombs and Soviet tanks. It was eating itself alive from the inside. Think about what the SS represented. For years, they had been the face of Nazi power, the enforcers of Hitler's most brutal policies. They didn't swear loyalty to Germany or to the German people. Their oath was personal, sworn directly to one man. Obedience unto death, that was the promise. And for years, that promise had bound them to unspeakable horrors. Mass executions in occupied territories, reprisals against innocent civilians, the systematic murder of millions of Jews and others deemed enemies of the state. They were trained to believe that loyalty was the highest virtue and that doubt was the worst kind of treason. But by early 1945, something fundamental was changing. Even among the hardened veterans, the true believers, faith was starting to erode. One officer from the Waffen SS Totenkopf division wrote in his diary in January, and his words are haunting. The Führer still speaks of victory, but we have no fuel, no food, and half the men are barefoot. We fight for empty words. Can you imagine writing that? This was a man who had dedicated everything to the cause, and now he was admitting it was all for nothing. As winter turned to spring, the military situation became catastrophic. In January and February, the Red Army launched a massive offensive that smashed through Poland and East Prussia like a hammer. Entire SS divisions, units with fearsome names like Nordland, Totenkopf, and Viking, were simply annihilated. The front collapsed so fast that officers lost control of their men. Survivors described scenes of absolute chaos. Columns of desperate refugees mixing with retreating soldiers, commanders fleeing under fire, units breaking apart and scattering. One soldier from the Dirlewanger Brigade, a unit known for its brutality, later testified to Allied interrogators, and what he said was shocking. Half our men vanished in the night. Some shot their officers first. The once feared SS was coming apart at the seams. But military defeat was only part of the story. What really broke the SS was betrayal from above. Hitler's orders in those final months were suicidal, demanding sacrifice that made no sense. When the Soviets surrounded the fortress city of Breslau, Hitler commanded it be held to the last man. SS units stationed there obeyed at first because that's what they had been trained to do. But as the siege dragged on for months, food ran out, ammunition ran out, and civilians were starving in cellars. A local SS sergeant wrote in his diary on March 3rd, and his words drip with bitterness. The party officials have already fled by plane. We are told to fight on. For what? The men talk of shooting the Gauleiter. If he returns, think about that. A year earlier, such thoughts would have been unthinkable, punishable by immediate execution. Now they were being written down in diaries. The rot was spreading everywhere. In Hungary, during the chaotic retreat from Budapest, members of the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen actually executed their own officers for trying to enforce suicidal counterattacks. The unit's war diary notes it cryptically. Command disrupted by insubordination. Several executions carried out, but post-war interrogations revealed the truth. These weren't official executions. They were revenge killings by enlisted men who had simply had enough. One corporal told his British interrogators with chilling simplicity, "We were tired of dying for nothing." The officers still believed in the Führer. We no longer did. Even the Hitler Youth Division, boys who had grown up entirely under Nazi education and had been praised for their ferocity in Normandy, even they were breaking. In the spring of 1945, what remained of the division was trapped in the Ruhr pocket, facing overwhelming Allied firepower. Diaries recovered after their surrender show despair that borders on mutiny. A 17-year-old company clerk wrote in April, "They say loyalty is our honor, but everyone wants only to live. Some throw away their insignia before we march." A few days later, his unit commander was found shot in the back. Whether it was enemy fire or his own men, nobody knows for sure. The SS' entire identity had been built on victory. Once defeat became certain, the whole moral structure just collapsed. The most striking evidence comes from the concentration camps, the heart of the SS system. As Allied armies got closer, guards started abandoning their posts in huge numbers. At Buchenwald, the commandant fled before the Americans arrived, leaving prisoners and just a handful of guards behind. Survivors remembered that by early April, the SS men simply ran away. Some even changed into civilian clothes and pretended to be prisoners themselves. At Dachau, one guard unit actually mutinied after officers ordered them to march thousands of prisoners out on foot. According to U.S. Army investigators, several SS men shot their superiors rather than take part. In the East, the chaos was even worse. At Auschwitz, most of the SS personnel fled as Soviet troops advanced, destroying documents and looting valuables before they disappeared. Some were captured by regular German army units who refused to help them. A Wehrmacht colonel wrote bitterly to his wife on January 27th. "The SS who terrorized us for years now come begging for uniforms to disguise themselves. We should hand them to the Russians." The contempt from regular soldiers was obvious. The SS' carefully crafted image of superiority was gone. But not everyone gave up. In Berlin, a corps of fanatics fought literally to the end. The SS divisions Nordland and Charlemagne, made up mostly of foreign volunteers, defended the government district until the last days of April. For many of them, loyalty had transformed into something darker, a kind of fatalism. A French volunteer named Eugene Vollet wrote in his final letter, "We know it is finished, but we will not run. To die here proves our faith." When Soviet troops stormed the Reich Chancellery, most of these defenders were killed. The few survivors described their final hours as a strange mixture of faith, alcohol, and despair. Inside Hitler's bunker itself, the cracks were impossible to hide. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the entire SS, the man who had built it into a state within a state, abandoned Hitler in the last week of April. He secretly tried to negotiate with the Allies through Count Folke Bernadotte of Sweden. When Hitler found out, the betrayal shattered what little trust remained. Hitler ordered Himmler's arrest and execution, but by then it was too late. The irony was crushing. The man who had demanded absolute loyalty had defected in the final hour. His subordinates reacted with confusion and rage. One bunker guard, Rockus Misch, later recalled the moment. When the news came that Himmler had gone over to the enemy, the SS men cursed him as a traitor. But no one still believed in the Führer either. We obeyed because there was no way out. Across Germany, Himmler's betrayal accelerated the collapse. SS men who had once seen him as a symbol of unbreakable order now realized their entire hierarchy had dissolved. Many tried desperately to surrender to the Western Allies rather than the Soviets, terrified of what would happen if they fell into Russian hands. Columns of Waffen SS troops marched west with white flags hidden in their packs. In Bavaria, the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division Gotz von Berlichingen surrendered en masse to American forces on May 7th, despite orders to keep fighting. Their commander tried to continue the resistance, but his own men arrested him. His adjutant later testified, "We took his pistol and locked him in a car." Nobody wanted to die for him anymore. Other units simply dissolved into thin air. In Austria, remnants of the 6th SS Mountain Division, Nord, threw away their uniforms and scattered into the Alps. Some hid in villages, others committed suicide. A diary found near Berchtesgaden contained a final entry dated May 8th. "We are finished. The Führer is dead. Himmler betrayed him, and our officers hide in barns. There is no SS anymore." In Czechoslovakia, the collapse took an even darker turn. The 18th SS Panzergrenadier Division Horst Wessel was retreating when word of Germany's surrender arrived. Civilians along their path rose in rebellion, and some SS units responded with massacres before disbanding. Others, desperate to avoid capture, turned on their own commanders to negotiate surrender. Czech partisans recorded that on May 9th, an SS lieutenant approached them waving a white cloth, shouting that his men had executed their colonel to stop further bloodshed. Post-war investigations confirmed multiple incidents like this in the chaos of surrender. The ideological heart of the SS, its belief in racial destiny and victory through willpower, simply could not survive reality. Diaries from ordinary soldiers show exactly how that collapse unfolded in their minds. Many still claim to admire Hitler even after admitting the war was lost, but their faith had become hollow, empty words with no meaning. An SS sergeant near Schwerin wrote in late April, "We have lived for years in obedience and pride. Now the Führer is silent and no one gives orders. The men want to go home. I cannot blame them." Others were more defiant, clinging to the myth even as it crumbled. One officer scrawled on a wall before fleeing, "Germany may perish, but the SS will live." Within days, his men had deserted. In the concentration camps still functioning in the war's final days, the disintegration of command revealed just how fragile the SS really was. Guards who had carried out atrocities for years suddenly vanished when defeat approached. Prisoners at Ravensbrück remembered that their overseers disappeared overnight on April 29th, leaving the gates unlocked. At Mauthausen, senior officers fled in civilian clothes while lower-ranking guards surrendered to American troops, claiming they had been forced to serve. Interrogators noted that many seemed relieved, even grateful to be captured. For all the propaganda about dying for the Führer, very few had the courage or conviction to actually follow through. Some tried to preserve a sense of honor. At Flossenburg, Commandant Max Kogel ordered the remaining guards to assemble on April 23rd and told them, "We will not abandon our duty." But that same night, he escaped with his adjutant. Within 24 hours, prisoners had taken control of the camp. Kogel later shot himself after being captured. His suicide was typical of SS officers who simply could not reconcile their sacred oaths with the collapse of everything they served. The breakdown extended even to elite SS formations stationed abroad. In Norway, the 6th SS Mountain Division Nord received orders to surrender peacefully to British forces, but a faction of hardliners tried to keep fighting, claiming Hitler was still alive. Their own comrades turned weapons on them. British officers who arrived days later found 20 dead Germans in a farmyard, victims of an internal firefight between those who accepted surrender and those who refused. The myth of unshakable SS unity had always relied on propaganda, strict discipline, and fear. Once those mechanisms failed, the institution crumbled faster than any regular army. Interrogations after the war revealed something uncomfortable. Many SS men had joined not because of ideology but for pay, prestige, or simple coercion. When defeat stripped away the aura of power, they were left with nothing but guilt and confusion. In one American prison camp, an SS officer was heard shouting, "We were lions when we had power, but now we are mice." By May, even the top leadership had abandoned any illusion of control. Heinrich Himmler, disguised and attempting to flee north, was captured by British troops near Bremervord on May 21st. He was carrying false papers under the name Heinrich Hitzinger. When interrogated, he claimed to have acted in Germany's best interests by negotiating peace. But the man who had demanded loyalty unto death could not face justice. He bit into a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth and died instantly. His suicide symbolized the end of the SS as both an organization and an idea. In its wake, Allied forces uncovered the full extent of its crimes. The Nuremberg trials exposed the machinery of mass murder, the bureaucracy of genocide, and the culture of blind obedience that had enabled it all. Yet even during those proceedings, prosecutors noted how quickly SS cohesion had dissolved once defeat came. Former members denounced their superiors, claimed ignorance, or insisted they were just following orders. The same men who had once boasted of their loyalty now competed to distance themselves from the cause they had served. Among the ruins of Germany, ordinary civilians witnessed this transformation firsthand. In Hamburg, one woman recorded in her diary on May 4th, "The SS who once strutted through our streets now come begging for food. Some hide their insignia. No one salutes them." A priest in Bavaria wrote that local villagers lynched 2 SS men who tried to commandeer a car to flee. Their arrogance vanished with their power, he noted coldly. So what do these final days reveal? The SS wasn't the monolith of conviction that propaganda claimed. It was a structure sustained by fear, lies, and coercion. Its ideology of loyalty collapsed the moment survival demanded betrayal. The same oaths that had justified murder could not inspire sacrifice once the Führer's promises turned to dust. The men who had sworn to die for him instead tore off their insignia, fled into the countryside, or turned their weapons on their own commanders. But within that collapse lies something darker that we need to understand. The disintegration of loyalty did not undo the crimes committed in its name. The same diaries that record despair and disillusionment also show that very few felt genuine remorse for the victims of the system they had served. Their guilt was personal, not moral. They mourned their own defeat, not the atrocities they had enabled. A former SS captain wrote in June 1945 from an internment camp, "We were betrayed by our leaders, not by our conscience." The blindness that had sustained the Reich persisted even in defeat. The story of the SS in 1945, seen through letters and testimonies, is not a story of redemption. It's a story of unraveling, of how an organization built on ideological absolutism could only survive while winning. Once the illusion of victory shattered, its discipline dissolved into panic and self-preservation. In the ruins of Breslau, in the forests of Austria, on the roads of Czechoslovakia, the supposed guardians of the Reich abandoned their posts, turned on each other, or hid among the very civilians they had once despised. When Allied troops entered Berlin, they found graffiti scrawled in a bunker corridor. "Treue ist unsere Ehre." Loyalty is our honor. Beneath it, someone had written in pencil, "No one is loyal now." That simple correction captured the end of the SS more clearly than any tribunal verdict could. The SS was not destroyed only by external force. It was consumed by its own internal decay, collapsing the moment when men who had believed themselves chosen realized they had fought for nothing but death. By the summer of 1945, what remained of the SS existed only in the memories of those who had survived it and the testimonies of those who would never forget. Some were executed, others imprisoned, many disappeared into anonymity and tried to forget. The black uniforms that had once symbolized absolute power became emblems of disgrace. In the rubble of German cities, people burned them for warmth. The oaths that had bound thousands to one man were forgotten or denied. And the organization that had demanded eternal loyalty died as suddenly and completely as the regime it served. Its final dissolution, preserved in fragments of diaries and the testimonies of those who broke rank, remains one of the starkest lessons of that terrible war. Fanaticism, however absolute it may appear, is ultimately fragile when confronted by reality. The SS, conceived as the embodiment of faith and strength, ended not with martyrdom or glory but with flight, betrayal, and silence. And in that silence lay the truest measure of its defeat.